Okay. Well, I don't see anybody on. I mean, it shows up, when you do Zoom. So, whatever. I'm gonna begin. Well, so this is what I did. I felt this chart, which comes at the end of a book I was using, is very confusing. First of all, just look back on that. So we're on page 204. That's what we had started with last year, and we were doing more in depth the great Rabbanim from Eretz Yisrael, particularly in the 16th century. Some go into the 17th, but specifically the 16th century. First of all, the chart's not correct. The first Rav there, Rabbi Yaakov Pollock, he goes to Poland. It has not to do with Israel. And the last one there, Rabbi Yeshua Katz, also has to do with Poland. So whoever did this chart did not do a very good proofreading job. So if you want to just make a little arrow, going in that direction, that will be fine. So then I actually spoke to my son Yechiel. He's the one who's a Rav in Southfield, Michigan. Unfortunately, he had driven there. He was not on one. Heard that one of the planes. They claimed the drivers didn't show up from the bus company. I have no idea what on. In any case, he was fine. He was coming from a wedding in New Jersey, so he just drove his own car to I think he's parked somewhere in Maryland and took the train into Washington. So it was actually easier. And he didn't stay to the very, very end. This way he avoided the big crowds, getting out of Washington. Okay, so I have redone it. Okay. It was early rock. I over with my son, the various Rabbanim who were listed here, and not to like denigrate, God forbid, but on this new, little chart here, I eliminated some of the names. Not to say that they were not great Rabbanim, but some of them are known more for like the author of Lachadodi, and then later Haribon, all my father was the one she would sit at the Shabbos table. I always thought that was dedicated to me. Yeah, to Malka, to Malka. So it's as I say, and they certainly were delved into halacha and everything, but it's not like they had some work besides these various shirim that they wrote that have come back. It's so funny also when I was doing this with my son. So I mentioned the names here, and he happened. He said, well, what did they write? Because some of them, they're known by what they wrote. They haven't come down in time by their names, so much. So, when we talked about the Kli Yakar, right? No one knows his real name is Kli Yakar. Right? Okay, so let's just look at this chart, comparing it to what we have here on the chart that's on page 204. So I started off with this Rabbi Yaakov Rav, and I always think it's fascinating to see where they lived, from where to where they journeyed. So I have here, right, he came from Spain originally. Obviously, he could have lived there up until 1492. So he spent, his youth, 15 years living in Spain. Family escaped. They went first to Morocco and then to Algeria. And from there, they went to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim. And then they went to Cairo. Obviously, got a position there. And then eventually back to Tzfat. And I wrote the year. He came back to Tzfat in 1524. And he remained there for the rest of his life. He is most famous. So I made this very brief about him. He is most famous because he wanted to reinstate the granting of smicha. So the chain of tradition would go on. But for that, he needed to call together a Sanhedrin. And I guess it's written somewhere that, if a large number of Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, wouldn't include rabbis in other countries, but just those living in Eretz Yisrael, that they could gather together, form a Sanhedrin, and thereby, start the reintroduction of smicha ordination. And he, for example, like I wrote, he ended up, he gave smicha to Rabbi Yosef Karo. So other people too will come too, but I wonder, he's so famous, Rabbi Yosef Karo. So I put that down. But I would say, already by the 1600s, there's a lot of controversy, and we'll talk about that when I introduce some other Rabbanim. So the very next one, Okay, so his name is Rabbi Levi ben Yaakov Ibn Chaviv. We know his father's name. So first of all, he came from Portugal. From there, the family went to Salonika, Greece, and then they went to Jerusalem. So he's not Sfat, he's Jerusalem. And again, he's the son of Rabbi Yaakov Ibn Chaviv. He's the one who wrote that Ein Yaakov. I told you that's which is now being translated by ArtScroll into English, and that's where. So it's like I think it will be a multi-volume set where he collected, all the Agadic sections of the Gemara and highlighted them in this sefer. Uh, and so his son was one who really finished the work and then had it published. And he became the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. Uh, he very much opposed Rabbi Yaakov Beiran in Tzfat, who wanted to reinstate the granting of smicha. So the two of them had this like ongoing feud went on. And I told you eventually, most of the Rabbanim in the Jewish world, sided with Ibn Chaviv, and the whole thing actually fell apart. Do you know who else once tried to convene a Sanhedrin? Yes, Napoleon. Because he was imbued with this idea of grandeur, that like the emperor, so to speak, and so he thought, and he had been to parts of Israel, and he felt that I don't know, it just entered his head that this would be a wonderful thing to do, but the whole thing sort of fell apart also. And I'm sure he had no interest in that there should be salicha now. That was a motivating factor, just that he thought that would, to his credit, that there would be this major convocation of rabbis in Paris. Okay. The next person I have here is Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. He's known as the Ramak. He lived in Sfat. And he's another one, right, who was ordained with Smicha, right, by Rabbi Yaakov Rav. All right, but they're like 14 people, but I'll sort of introduce them. Otherwise it's a little overwhelming. And he was a very renowned Kabbalist. Obviously, you could tell from his name he came from Cordova, or his family had. All right. And look, he was born in 1522. So obviously the family had already been expelled from Spain, right? And I'm not sure what their whole journey was, but whatever, the family eventually came to Spot, and that's where he was born. Right? So he's a real Israeli, you know. And then he wrote this very, voluminous commentary on the Zohar. So his name became quite well known in Kabbalistic. Now you have to understand, all of these Rabbanim, even if I tell you that their main interest focus was on Kabbalah, they all studied, obviously the Gemara and stressed halacha. It's not like that was, they thought that wasn't important. But what they're known for is for the Kabbalistic writing. We now have the most famous, right, Kabbalist, of this generation, and that's Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Ashkenazi. Obviously, originally the family came somewhere from, Ashkenaz, from France, Germany area, and this is the Ari. Okay, and he is certainly, I would say, the most famous Kabbalist. And he actually, he claimed that after Yahoo, had revealed himself to him. That's how he got a lot of his ideas. You can see, by the way, if you look back just at his date. So he was born, obviously already in Israel in 1534. But look at this, the Ramak lived 1522. He's born 1534, but they both died like 2 years apart. So he was a relatively young man when the Ari passed away. And he, obviously was born in Jerusalem, spent years there, but then he went to Cairo. Cairo obviously was a very substantial Jewish community, at this time period. From the time that the Rambam lived there, and then his son Avraham lived there. Of course, then we're going back a few centuries, but obviously this Jewish community maintained itself there, through the generation. And then eventually he goes to Tzfat in 1570. Although, so it's interesting. So we always associate him with Tzfat, and he's buried there, and he's a Rishul, that you can go and visit. But he really only lived 2 years in Tzfat. Now, he never wrote down any of his thoughts or interpretations, of Kabbalah and the Zohar. They're going to see, we'll come to in a little while. The man who's responsible was his student or his disciple, right? Who was responsible for finally writing down everything. Okay, now we'll talk about Rabbi Yosef Karo, the giant in halacha. But notice at the bottom I wrote, he also studied Kabbalah. It's not like, they totally renounced it, as will happen later on, in certain, Misnadisha families from Poland and Lithuania. He was actually born in Spain, but he left when he was 4-year-old. And the family went to Constantinople. And then for many years, he was in Adrianople, and he started writing some of his famous works in Adrianople. And then eventually, though, he came to Tzfat. So he actually lived quite a nice long life, as you can see. All right. Now, who did he study under? This Rabbi Yaakov Bey Rav. So remember, he's the one who decided the Grand Smicha, Kol Sanhedrin. Okay. And he became, they could see he was such a brilliant man. And he was actually made, first he served on the Beis Din in Tzfat, and then eventually he was made the head of it. And that was already in the year 1506. So these are his most famous works. He wrote the Beis Yosef. Again, this is a work of halacha. It's somewhat lengthy. It's based on the Tur thing, dividing up all halacha into 4, shurot, or turim, that's why it's based on the Tur. And later on, though, then he felt, there was a need for the more general public to have a shortened version of his Beis Yaakov. And it was then published and called the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. The ironic thing is that what he considered to be, a shorter, more accessible, safer, that all these commentaries were written on the Shulchan Aruch, after his time. Okay, now we'll just mention this one other person, who originally, you can tell from his name, he was an Italian Jew, really, originally. That's Rabbi Moshe Trani, known as the Mabit. So he was born in Trani, Italy. Then the family went, and probably maybe they originally were Sephardic Jews, right, coming out of Spain. Then the family went and settled in Salonika. So you can see Salonika was a very, very important center of, Jewish life in those days. It lasted all the way up until World War II. Really, almost the entire population murdered by the Nazis. But he eventually also drifted towards Tzfat. So it's so interesting how Tzfat became this huge, huge center. So let's just think about what were the major Jewish communities in the land of Israel at this time. So it's Tzfat and Jerusalem. We've already mentioned them. There is also Jewish community in Tiberia. And you can understand, again, the Rambam's buried there. There's a place to be. And Hebron. Hebron already had a Jewish community. And you're going to see, I'm going to come to it. There was one of them, there actually was a Jewish community in Gaza. So those Palestinians want to claim that a piece of land, but it was actually, right, the Jews, they laid claim to it. Okay, now let's, so he was a disciple of Rabbi Yaakov Bey Rav. He got smicha from him. He was also a member of the Tzfat Beis Din. And after Rabbi Yosef Karo passed away, which was 1575, so for the next 5 years, the Mabit became the head of that Beis Din. And I guess it was highly respected. So I guess any promulgations that would have come out of this Beis Din, had impact on obviously Israeli Jewry, but Jews elsewhere, because it was so highly thought of, and you had to be up a certain caliber to serve on this Beis Din. The next person who you can tell also has a background from France, Germany. That's Rabbi Bezalel Ashkenazi. and he lived in Eretz Israel, but eventually he went to Cairo. You'll see he spent a major portion of his life in Cairo, and then, but towards the end of his life, he decided to move and be in Jerusalem. He became actually the chief rabbi of Egypt. You know, I don't know if there were Jews living in Alexandria. I don't know other areas, but Cairo was the major Jewish community in this time period. And you can see he was there for close to 40 years. He was the chief rabbi. Now, this is what he's known for. He wrote this book called the Shita Mikubetzet. And it's so funny when I say things to my son, he says, "Oh, yeah, or I own this, whatever." So it's a compilation of all the chidushim of many of the Rishonim on many tractates of the Gemara. So it's a halachic work, right? But so just picture view. So the Gemara was written, compiled, let's say around the year 450 CE. And then you go through the Gaonic period. Then we go, the main centers of Jewry will transfer them to Spain and or France, Germany, which is Ashkenazi, probably where at some point his family had lived there. So the two prime commentators in the Gemara would be Rashi, and then his grandchildren or any generation coming after him, which would have been the Tosfos. And then we have other Rabbanim after who are also making comments, and they're in the Gemara often like on the side or somewhere in the back. Am I correct? Am I agree? For somebody who really didn't study this, I learned a lot of preparing for all this. So this Shita Mekubetzet, is that a separate volume, Shita Mekubetzet? Yes. Ah, maybe that's what my son said it had. I'm not sure. Yeah. Oh, okay. But you can see this is a great source because now we know what various Rishonim what their comments are on, the basic Gemara, and then Rashi's comments or Tosfos comments, and now the Rishonim's, comments. All right. Another great Rav is Rabbi Moshe Alshich, who is also really known. The sefer that he wrote is his name, actually. What is that? My phone? Oh, let me just make sure. That's nothing. What's her friend? This is a friend of mine years ago. She's moved to several places. I think now she's in Cincinnati. She went to live near her daughter there. Okay. So now we'll do the Rabbi Moshe Alshich. Now you see that these last few Rabbanim, they are living like their whole lives, in that 16th century. Some of the others, were already born in the 15th century and then came, to live in various places. So the Alshich, so he, the family came to Adrianople, obviously, also probably originally from Spain or Portugal, but he himself, was born in Adrianople, that's Turkey. Then he actually, then I wrote after, so you ignore it. He studied under Rabbi Yosef Karo in Adrianople. So that's what he got to know him, way in advance. And then eventually he moves to Salonika, Greece, and then from there he goes to Tzfat. So the next little paragraph says, so he studied under Rabbi Yosef Karo in Adrianople, and he later was ordained by him in Tzfat. So you see, it did go on another generation from Rabbi Yaakov Rav to Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he in turn now is given smicha for the Alsha. And he served as a dayan in that great Beis Din of Tzfat. I mean, I've been to Tzfat. I'm sure you guys have too. I mean, I don't remember they were pointing out a building there that was Beis Din. I just remember the shuls. Oh, yeah. Okay. Probably at the time the Auschwitz meant nothing to me, so maybe I was there, but it, What's the really gorgeous one? That's the Iris Shul. Yeah, yeah, that's a really everyone remembers that color. Really stunning. Um, and this is what he's known for. He's known for his sermons, and used to give. I guess he was a great preacher on biblical commentary, and it refers to the writings are referred to al Shulchan Kadosh. Not just that he's called al Shulchan Kadosh. His work is actually known by that. And these sermons, like I know from my son, you could buy today modern, compilations of sermons, and from this you get ideas, Nowadays, of course, what they do, they go on the computer and that's something. Oh my God, these rabbits are so brilliant. How do they know it? So you could do it too. But still, it's the way you're delivering, how you're putting the material together. That's what makes you, a famous, lecturer, someone who gives beautiful classes or sermons, shul on Yom Shabbos, Yom and apparently people will study it, right? Because they said they'd be these sermons, that were then published. And generations, of Rabbanim after would look at these for ideas to include in their sermon. Oh, interesting. On the Tanakh, right? Or right? Yeah, right. So this would be like a further insight into understanding, right? Very fast, right? Because the bulk of, let's say, Mikros Gedolos, these are mostly some earlier medieval commentators. So here this would be like a later individual, who was writing commentary. Um, and the last person who I felt was so famous, believe me, I don't, as I say, I don't want to, put down the names of these others, Rabbonim, who I have here, but I think it's so confusing, and I'd rather pick and choose those who you would most likely be familiar with, would have heard, or sometimes you go to a lecture and somebody quotes, so these others stand out. So the last one, who's now 16th, but going into the 17th century, is Rabbi Chaim Vital. And he was born in Tzfat. At a certain point, he went to Yerushalayim, and eventually, though, he ended up in Damascus, Syria. Okay. He was a disciple of the Alshich and also of the Ari. And he's the last of the Rabbanim who received Smicha in the year 1590. That's why I told you it really fell apart by that year 1600. Nobody else is getting an official Smicha. But he's known as a Kabbalist. And he learned his Kabbalah under Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, right? He's the first great Kabbalist in Israel. But later, right, he was studying under the Arizal, and he became his foremost disciple. Now remember, I told you the Ari, I'm not sure what his reason was, wasn't comfortable writing down his various thoughts, on Kabbalah. But again, he had this very beautiful, close relationship with Rabbi Chaim Vital. So he relied on Rabbi Chaim to accurately transcribe his Kabbalistic system and his works for future generations. So I mentioned, I think last time, to me, makes me think of Rabbi Soloveitchik, because he really didn't, even though there's so many books out there now, they say authored by him, it was more that his students recorded it or they took notes, and then based on those, lectures, they then wrote for him, and whatever they attribute it to Rabbi Soloveitchik, they obviously had heard from or read other people's notes. I remember when my husband was in Smicha, so I forget the man's name. So he said there were certain notes that used to be passed around as as the best way, to study. And I actually met the guy once, He's obviously several years older than my husband. I guess he wrote very good, clear notes. And he was a rabbi in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I can't for the life of me think of his name. Um, and it's interesting. This comes to be known as the Eighth Chaim. I don't study Kabbalah, you know, so I'm not really familiar. What's going on here? Oh, I was wondering. Okay. Any case, and he became the successor, obviously, to the Ari after the Ari died in 1572. But look how many years beyond that he lived. He didn't die till 1620. He too, I don't remember when I had done him at last year. He had so he had written down, so many of the things he had learned from the Arizal, but he also like kept it under lock and key. He also wasn't ready yet, to have these works published. But I think one time he was ill, and his brother gave the key like to the vault, wherever to other guys who fast wrote down. Like a whole bunch of them got together and wrote down the notes, and that's how it became. you know, that's how right, right. You all have right. The base was always halacha, right? Yes, interesting. And or as you say, knowing the Tanakh and the Gemara, right? But then you delve into the soul, into Kabbalah. I told you I come from a tradition that study that one. So no, I believe these are the Israeli ones. They are writing in Hebrew. You're thinking of Spanish or Arabic. So those were the great Rabbanim up, into that fifth part of the 15th century. Certainly like the Rambam, he wrote a lot in Arabic. But no, by here, and even I talked about the Rambam, certain of his works, like his Mishnah Torah, is written in Hebrew. And I remember studying parts, some beautiful, beautiful, clear Hebrew. It's actually a pleasure to read and learn from his writing. Listen, I think I told you this also when my father went away to yeshiva. Actually, it was called a Times on Lower East Side. Um, so my Zeta insisted he would write him letters in Hebrew, and then my father write him back in Hebrew. Then he'd correct it and send it back. So my father never indicated any resentment over this, but as a result, he spoke of very like a biblical Hebrew, more, people who've only studied it and they go to Israel. It's there are many more terms, that are used there. So some Israelis will sometimes make fun of somebody, who only comes from that sort of tradition. Thank God my father did not make me do that. So, but he sent me to a school, which was completely Ivrit be'Ivrit. So I really learned Hebrew going to Central. It's Manhattan Central. Okay, some of you might know people more from Brooklyn Central, but Manhattan Central. It had only opened up the year before. Okay, so I think we've done, the great Rabban. Again, some of these other Rabbanim also made beautiful contributions, but I'm only highlighting those whose names you might be more familiar with, or their works, you might know. And these are the ones like your knowledge of. Now I didn't have a chance. It takes a long time to do one. But we will start doing some learning today about those great Rabbanim from Poland. Right. So it starts off, most of them are from Poland. Eventually Poland and Lithuania join as one country. So then, you'll hear some more names and you can identify them more as Lithuanian Jews. But at this period, most of them are Polish Jews. And even though Jews had been coming to live in Poland already in the 1400s, it really picks up, into that 16th century, and most of them were coming from Germany, where times were very bad, great upheavals constantly, um, different revolts, and they were then to live from one place to the other. So eventually, again, because the king in Poland was very anxious, actually, for to move there, or he wanted them. One of them should care less about that, but a lot of them became business people. They were middlemen, and that's what was lacking in this country. We had a lot of peasants, and we had the noblemen. So that's why he encouraged the Jews to move there, and he granted them rights, freedom of religion. Um, and so it was a good life for the Jews in Poland. It was changed in the mid 17th century. That's what Papa, those terrible uprisings from Khmelnytsky. But up until then, they did have a good life, and they flourished. And so many great rabbanim have come up of Poland. So let me just put this away, and now we'll start doing some of these great rabbanim from Poland. What did I? Is that in Warsaw? Where is it? Right. Well, that's the major city. Yeah, yeah. I think I had read about that. Yeah. Um, it's really quite interesting. No, so where am I? Oh, I know I can look them all, review them all. Um, just a second. All right, so let me just. I'll start here. I I really should start the two first main ones of that Rabbi Yaakov Scholar, who's the one they put in the wrong place on go to the right. And I'll make a new one for next. So no, just like when I was sure I'll make one separate for Poland. Um, this is, by the way, where we're going to come across the Maharsha and the Maharshal. And my son said they are both important and great. The names were really very, very interesting. And then there's also Maharshak. I don't know. I can't keep track of it. No matter how many times I, look this over, I find this incredibly. How did I get those ones from? Oh, here. I have it here. Okay, now I have it. It's on. Yes. Right. Yes. Yes. Right. But their specialty, so to speak. Yes. Yeah. And you'll see when I'm now going even into the Jews of Poland, you'll see a lot of their work is based on what happened what's going on in Israel and these great rock you know. But if you look at that original chart that I had given you, you'll see, look how many well-known Rabbanim are in the 16th century in Israel. And by the time we come now to the 17th century, and I told you because at this point, the Ottoman Empire is ruling over, and there's a lot of corruption. And the Jews who lived in Israel were impoverished. Um, and so many of them are going to emigrate. They're not going to stay, or even those who might have stayed. Their lives were such upheaval. Also, I mean, they were a lot of, especially those rabbinic type of community. They were relying on money coming from outside. They were not earning. Remember, oh, the 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 son-in-law was it? the very famous woman, and he gets from Spain who went to then Constantinople, and she gave money for Israel. And he tried to introduce, I think it was worm business. Uh, but it never petered out. And all these people were just relying on souls coming from Europe, you know. So again, very, very, very impoverished. Um, by the way, if you ever have a chance to go back to Jerusalem, I found this, I think it was just wandering around. I love to do this. Go to the old quarter and kind of go up and down, and you discover all these tiny little museums. So there's one museum, or maybe Shalom took, you know, the Spanish, Portuguese background, but it was because most of the Jews actually became were Sephardim. It was majority Sephardim until later became, all heavily Ashkenazi. But it shows you a home from maybe the 1700s, so it's later than what we're doing now. Um, but you could see how poor these people were. There was a cistern, like in the courtyard, where they would get their water supply, or they would have to collect water from the roof, for the rainy season. And very rudimentary, little like kitchen area, you know, the children or the clothing. It's very fascinating. So I sometimes find it most interesting places. So, and you'll bump into these little tiny museums. They're not like the larger or more famous ones. Okay, I have nothing more. Okay. Um, I'll just reread this because I think it's important. Throughout the 15th century, so we're talking about the 14th, the Jews of Poland remained heavily dependent on their brethren in Germany. Most of the original rabbinic and educational leaders of Poland were German born and educated, but then they all gravitated eastward. In the 16th century, the situation was reversed, and Poland became the center of Torah learning for the Jewish world. So even though there's some very, very great Rabbanim, that we're talking about, in Israel, the larger numbers of Jews are in Poland. Right? And the Polish yeshiva now began exporting its students to serve as rabbinic leaders throughout Germany, Central Europe, and Italy. I'll make a separate chart also at some point for the Rabbanim from Italy and those from Germany and Czechoslovakia. It's the growth of Torah scholarship is, where it started in Poland is attributed to two great rabbanim. Okay, so the first one is that Rabbi Yaakov Pollock, who I hope you've made an arrow to move him right to the right, not he's in the wrong place. His dates are, and again, I'll redo it so it's like the one I did from Israel. He was born about, we don't always know exact dates, 1455, and he lived into to 1530. So nice, relatively good long life. He's the first famous Polish-born Talmudic scholar and rabbinic leader. Right. For a while, he served also. He learned under this Rabbi Yaakov Margolis of Nuremberg, and then he was Rabbi Moshe Shiva, actually in Prague. Then he got into a big dispute there with some. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We've done this in the past. Let me see. So, needless to say, he didn't get along with everybody. He had dealings with the Ramah. We'll do the Ramah in a little while. So then, because of all the problems he was having in Prague, he went back to Poland. He was the rabbi of Krakow. Now he gets into controversy again with a rabbi from Italy. Very strong personality. Then he went to Israel for a while, and he stopped in Turkey, and then he came back and he went to. He never wrote any written work, but this is what he's famous for developing, a way of studying Talmud, studying Gemara called Pilpul. So I don't think it's as popular at all nowadays. It's a very convoluted way of learning, and you try to show your brilliance, bringing in all sorts, sources. Any case, uh, and this way of learning though became very, very popular, you know, and that's what when they, they like this, like you of learning, with the Pilpul method. Um, Other Rabbanim criticized it. For example, even the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Low was his last name. The Maharal of Prague totally opposed. He stressed studying Mishnah, you know, he really thought that you're spending your time and each one's trying to outshine the other, and so he again criticized it. Um, okay, and it was during his lifetime Jewish Poland began to gain recognition as the center of Torah learning. Now let's just talk about this Shalom Shachar, who's the other preeminent scholar from that first generation of Polish Rabbana. So he was actually born around 1490 and he lived into the year 1558. All right. So later than Rabbi Yaakov Pollock. Okay. He became actually a disciple of Rabbi Yaakov Pollock and he continued this process of Talmudic development in Poland. When Rabbi Yaakov Pollock passed away, 1530, he became his successor, became Rabbi of Lublin. All right, and he also had a yeshiva there. This is for over 40 years. Says almost all the great rabbinic leaders of Jewish Poland in the 16th century were his students of this Lublin yeshiva. Very, very prominent. He also did not leave any written works. What are there some other things here? Dealings with the king of Poland at the time. Um, they would meet at those annual trade fairs, and that's all they also would. Any, let's say, any tradition, any interpretation of Jewish law. This was a nice central place at these fairs to disseminate the information to other Jews, and that could talk about their community, share it with everybody. And this became eventually what called the Council of Four Lands. Okay? And eventually in the early 17th century, it actually spring and the fall. Originally, it was just once a year. Now it became twice a year. And this lasted all the way into the year 1764. All right. Okay. All right. So those two men, those are the two giants. Who started off, with the great step one of Poland. Now let's just do one more. Let's do the Ramah. All right. He was born in 1530 and lived to 1572. And he was a disciple, obviously one of the key disciples of this Rabbi Shalom Shachna. I mean, you can see they're each learning one, from the other. Came from Krakow. And he actually became the son-in-law of Rabbi Shalom Shachar. Remember, we did this last year. So interesting. So many of these great scholars became the sons-in-law, previous Rabbanim. They went there to keep these brilliant men as part of their family. And then he became a rabbi there. Unfortunately, his first wife passed away. There's the Ramaz Shul, which is the tour. And then he married the daughter of another prominent Krakow Jewish family. He established a yeshiva there. So now Krakow and Lublin now became, the two prominent yeshivas, but it's also like a bit of competition, between the two. Who's going to attract, the better guys? He was definitely known as a great halachic authority. And but he did not like Pilpul, right? He just straightforward learning, knowing the halacha well. Okay. He also studied, by the way, some Jewish philosophy and Kabbalah. And here, let me just see. He lived right, okay, and just into the 16th century. Now he's so famous, Rabbi Moshe Shlomo Ramah, because of the annotations that he made. Apparently, if you open up a real shulchan, you will see, like, you have Rabbi Yosef Caro's remarks, comments, interpretation, and following it to the Ramaz. It's is it set off or it's a different print? I'm trying to remember. My husband looked it up. Right. So you can tell when it is the Ramaz speaking. Right. Yeah, yes, yes. So everyone, because I really did that with, like, with the shock and the Taz that we saw with their comments. So yeah, that would be very fascinating because that will seem to be a basic original text, right? Where the Ramah is. Okay. Uh, he also, some of it's called the Sefer Hamapah, the Shulchan Aruch. That's that. It is the Mapah. It's a tablecloth. Yeah, that's right. He called it that. And that's, these notes that are inserted into the Shulchan Aruch. And so he represented more the Ashkenazi way of doing things. Although Rabbi Yosef Karo originally, I mean, he was trying to incorporate, some various customs or interpretations from the Ashkenazi. But I guess people afterwards felt he wasn't giving enough of the Ashkenazi viewpoint. So then the Ramah wrote this work. And as we know, the Shulchan Aruch, the Supreme Code of Law for Jewry all over the world, and like everybody. There you go. Okay, maybe if there's any. Right, a lot of his work is based on the opinions of the Tosfos, and then later Ashkenazi scholars. And it goes because Rabbi Yosef Karo bases a lot of his interpretations or choice of views based on that of the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rush. Okay, the Rush though originally actually is from Germany. Those, but mostly emphasis on the. Okay. Okay. Then he also wrote some commentaries on the Torah and the base. So again, it's all halacha. Great halacha. Okay, let's see where wrote some other things on codex diet and the dietary laws. Some people didn't like this or whatever. Another time. Oh, some people criticized him that he was writing down a lot of the Polish customs and not the German one. Anything else? Oh, I happen to like this. He was an expert on a scribe, and he attained a special authoritative tikkun, right? From Tzfat. He was in communication with Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he sent him this copy of this, like an authoritative scroll. And he wrote a Torah scroll following his, you know, like when you look at any place actually in Tanakh, you often will have a version that's come down to us through the centuries, but it will sometimes say, well, this is the Ketiv, it's how it's written, but on the side we'll say Crete, but this is how you should read it, right? And all right, whatever became the thing, and then I had to mention this to you that on his tombstone, from Moshe, when we read the Rambam to Moshe the Ramah, there was no one like Moshe. I think that's very beautiful. All right, so we'll continue next time. Again, Hashem, I will have a updated chart for these Rabbanim of. Okay. Yes, yes, right. Remember, you had done that for me. We had redone that when it came to the. So, yeah, right. Because you can't remember all the stories. Some of them were really quite fascinating, but it's just impossible to redo all of them. So, whatever. That's why I brought up my original notes to clue in on these. But as far as just a chart listing the major contributions, like you said, it's like it's bullet. It sticks out. You can see it very well. All right, and then in Mir Hashem, so I definitely want to do the Polish one, but I will also try to do some of those Rabbanim from Italy and those also from Germany, slash Moravia, you know, are also, you know, quite famous. He, you know, I wonder when a student in the yeshiva studies, some of their work, do they know who these? Yeah, no, right, yeah. I've always liked that. I've always uh, liked to study Jewish history and do it chronologically. Yeah. Ah, right, further beyond that, right. Like we'll get to eventually Magen Abraham, and that's though he comes after the Taz of the Shah, right? And then he becomes like the supreme authority, for halacha. I don't know, like, is it turning off? I'll let her figure it out. I don't know. All right, I don't know. Oh, I thought um, a little something was oh, a bar mitzvah. And look, the weather's like, oh, rain. Boy, was it children. Oh my God. It was like, my pleasure. Thank you for coming. I'll see you guys in a few more weeks. Right. Okay. Then I can give you a full report of everything. Is the rabbi